Welcome back. This is the fourth session, and today we'll be covering user testing and feedback. So for user testing, it is a very crucial part of marketing to ensure that your product meets the needs of your target market. Um, Basically, you have to find out what the target market needs and make sure that your product fulfills those needs. And to do this, to do the research to figure out what your audience needs, there's two different methods. You have your primary research and then your secondary research. Your primary research typically involves directly talking with or interacting with the users to gather feedback and information from them. And your secondary market usually involves gathering and analyzing data and information that others have collected and forming conclusions with that data. And this provides valuable insights into user behavior, preferences, and market trends. So we'll go over some primary research methods. Our first one are surveys. And surveys are basically used to collect feedback. Either they can be online surveys, or people can like scan a QR code or find on the web, or they can be paper that you hand out or people find somewhere. And it's usually structured with open-ended questions to answer, depending on what kind of information you want to track. Our second primary research method would be focus groups. And usually involves a small group of participants that you can talk to and have a discussion about your product or service and either ask questions about pain points or stuff that they're dealing with, like problems they're dealing with. Our third one are interviews, and this is a lot like the surveys, except that you're usually doing these in person and you're trying to go more in depth that you really can't through like an online form or something because you're going to be in there and you can respond to their feedback back. And if you have any other questions, then you can ask them. And it helps you understand deeper into the participants' experiences, motivations, and preferences. Then we have the A/B testing, which basically involves creating two versions of your product with usually one or two features different in each version. And you can go to your potential customers and ask them which one they like better, and receive feedback to figure out which version of the product performs better. Then lastly, we have prototype testing, which basically allows users to interact with early stage prototypes to provide feedback before you're finally developing a product. And the reason you do this in the early stage is because you put in less time. So it's a lot easier to change features or functionalities because you haven't gotten too attached. And it's a lot less work usually to change features and prototypes than it is to completely develop your product and then get feedback and then change that product completely. Yeah.
So now let's get into the secondary research methods, which mainly focus on getting information from past sources. So the first is a literature review, which involves conducting a thorough review of academic papers, industry reports, books, articles, or really any other written means that currently exist. The next secondary research method is competitor analysis, and this involves studying the marketing strategies of your competitors as well as their customer base. And since they're in a similar space, this can help you to better understand your market as well. The third secondary research method is online forums. Um, this involves social media groups where users discuss their experience with products. You may be familiar with Reddit or Quora, two of the most popular online forums where people talk about different products and put their reviews on them. The next secondary research method is customer surveys. Um, this involves reviewing the results of surveys and studies conducted by other organizations. So different from actually conducting a survey, here we're looking at the results of other people's past surveys.
So what to do after you gather the feedback? So step one would be to analyze, which means you basically have to summarize and go through all the data you collected. Like, for example, if you conducted a survey and you got 30 responses, you should go through the 30 responses and form conclusions based on the responses to figure out what your customer base wants and preferences. Step two would be to validate your target market. And that's basically using the conclusions that you made to make sure that you're targeting the right market, or maybe you pivot and also interview another market and you found out that that market is better and has closer preferences and needs to what your product solves. The third step would be to adapt. So based on the requirements of your target market, either the one you interviewed originally or if you pivoted the second one, you should adapt your product so it better fits and solves their needs and preferences.
Now let's talk about the decision-making unit. This involves four types of people that play a key role in the sale or the use of your product. So the first type is the end user. So pretty self-explanatory. This is the final person who will be using your product or service. There's also the primary economic buyer. This is the individual or community that will purchase and buy your product. Thirdly, we have the champion. This is the individual or community that will advocate to buy the product. And lastly, we have the influencer, which is an external person who also advocates to buy the product. And oftentimes, the champion will go to the influencer to get their opinion on the product. So let's take the example of a phone. The end user would be a kid, perhaps someone around your age. The primary economic buyer would be their parent, since the parent is the one with the money who would buy the phone. The champion would be the kid as well, since they would be advocating to buy the phone. They would be trying to convince their parents to buy the phone for them. And lastly, the influencer could be their friend who they go to for their opinion on a phone, or any other social media influencer who talks about getting the phone as well.
So with these four sessions that we've talked about over the last couple of videos and this video, here we want to talk about maybe potentially making a pitch if you want to, where you can utilize all the information that we've taught you. So we have a quick pitch breakdown if you want to follow this, and this would rough up to 2 minutes to 2.5 minutes. So you would spend the first 30 seconds to state the problem that you're being solved and its significance, basically like the first lesson that we had. Then you would spend around 45 seconds explaining the solution that you came up with and like the features. So more like the second session that we talked about. And then you would spend about 30 seconds identifying the target market. And here you could use like the primary market, secondary market, all those terms that we talked about in the third session. And then lastly, you can explain the types of user testing or research that you already did, want to do, are doing, which would be all the content that we talked about in this class. Cool, thank you. This would conclude our lessons.